Tonight's session, our Q&A session that we hold fortnightly. I'm Bridget Barry from Farming for Nature. Every 2 weeks, we have this Q&A session to speak to one of our ambassadors, our Farming for Nature ambassadors, and these are exemplary farmers from across Ireland that have been chosen as ambassadors through a big judgment and selection process. And this is a great opportunity for us to learn about their farm and how they practice farming for nature. I will kickstart the event tonight by asking our guest speaker a few questions, and then I encourage any of you to write into the chat box any questions that you'll have, and we'll get the opportunity to ask Henry the questions. If you miss any of tonight's session, or if you know of anyone that would like to listen to it, it should be on our YouTube channel by tomorrow. So on to tonight's event. We are delighted to welcome Henry O Donnell from County Donegal to join us. Henry runs an organic suckler and sheep farm on 92 hectares, of which 17 is commonage. He is also the project manager of the Inishowen EIP, which has 25 farmers in it. Henry, welcome and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Bridget. Thank you for the invite.
Listen, Henry, it's great to profile a HMV farm like yourselves, but before we get into that, perhaps you might just explain to us what your farm looks like and what your farming system is for those of us who haven't been there.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. Well, I suppose we feel we have a quite typical Inishowen farm. We're in the very northwest tip of Ireland here. We have basically a small bit of mineral good soil, which is around my dwelling house and farmyard here. The land then graduates up to heavier soils, getting more peaty, and then we graduate up farther again to where we're on peatlands, and that's our enclosed land. And then yet again above that, our commonage is in the higher reaches of the uplands. And that would be quite common here in Inishowen. We have a couple of small pieces of out farms. One of them is 3 hectares of good mineral soil, which is along our main road here, which is again at the bottom of the valley. We have another farm then that's a mile away that would be very heavy soil and quickly goes into blanket peat. And it runs down to a lake, and as I say, it would be heavy soil. I suppose really a lot of our land we would have to class as high nature value land.
And I mean, we're coming into spring now, and what's it? You know, the colours starting to come out, the blooms kind of coming out, or what's it look like, or what's it sound like, or you know, have you got many different hedgerows breaking up the different habitats, or? Yeah,
well, we would have planted a couple of kilometers of hedgerows in the last few years. Now, because we're so far north here, the growing season is very lit. Realistically speaking, cattle don't really have much to graze on until May here because it is so lit. Our system here would be that we have sort of half continental cattle and half Galloway cattle. Now, the continental cattle would be concentrated more on the better quality land and have to be housed earlier because they're heavier and ground conditions get wet very quickly here. The Galloways we have introduced since 2017, I think, was when we got the first black Galloways. We felt we weren't really utilizing our uplands properly with the sheep, and in conjunction with that, at the same time, we moved from crossbred sheep back to mountain blackface ewes. Again, we felt they were tougher, they were more in tune with the type of land we have. So we have found that the Galloways and the sheep are doing very, very well in the upper regions of the farm. And indeed, the year before last, we introduced the Galloways back onto the commonage. Now,
what was your pivot moment? Why did you were using the continentals?
We just felt that our continentals were a high cost system, they were housed too long, and if we looked at increasing the numbers of them, it was actually going to make things worse. So we looked at the Galloways, and we knew they were non-selective grazers, that they like the uplands, that they would actually improve the uplands for other animals because they were so non-selective grazers. So we said we had to try the Galloway breed, because we had to do something to look at our costs, and we felt that there was too many inputs coming in the farm gate, and we weren't utilizing our natural environment properly. And I think we've been vindicated on that, because the Galloways, really, to put it very simply, are grazing a platform of land that we weren't really using for cattle.
Do they outwinter, or?
We have facility where some of them can outwinter, but the reality is, if it gets too wet, for convenience, we house for shorter periods. We actually have them housed at the moment. Now, I would hope to let them out sort of Patrick's Day, even if I do have to supplement them with a bit of hay or silage, because they're much happier out, and they will calve better out. They calve unassisted. They probably stop calving if you annoy them too much trying to watch them. So we found, get them out and they'll be fine. And again, that's a better use of resources, that they're not standing in a shed. It's not their natural environment. They have a very thick coat. They're very happy out. The reality is, they would be very happy out all year round, but we would just have concerns about damage in the environment they're in. And we just feel that it's more sense to take them off it for the wet periods, especially sort of January, February.
Makes sense. And you supplement them with haylage, you were saying. You grow this yourselves, do you? Or? Yeah,
we try not to take any feed in the farm gate. Ideally, the only thing we would purchase here is straw for bedding the cattle in the organic system. Now, we do buy a small quantity of organic concentrates, just for some younger stock, and because some of our silage is grown out fairly mature, and it wouldn't have that high digestibility. So we do use a small amount, and we like to have a small amount maybe for the horn sheep that are having twin lambs for a short period coming up to lambing. But nothing like the inputs we used to use when we were farming in a more conventional system. And I have to say, we're much happier with the direction we're taking. I suppose one of our fears or our disappointments, if you like, at the moment, is we feel we're producing a fabulous product, and we're not always rewarded for it. But maybe as the organics grow and become more popular, that will change as well.
Are you direct to market?
No, we would have aspirations, a number of us here in Inishowen that have Galloway cattle, to do something with our produce. Now, we have talked about it, and we have sat around the kitchen table making provisional plans, but as of yet, we haven't taken it any further. But we definitely have aspirations that this fabulous produce produced on the uplands, and managed and grazed in a very sustainable way, with very little inputs, very little anthelmintics, no antibiotic use, that really the consumer, if they know about this, I do feel that there's an option here for a real premium product. But just as of yet, with time constraints and everything else, we haven't taken it any further.
And have you seen nature, like, since you've had the Galloways, have you seen nature responding slightly differently up in?
Well, funny, people ask me that, and the thing I see most is the animals actually respond. Like the Galloways are just so at home, in the calf so naturally. It's very rare that you actually have to intervene. and like you'll see them going into an area maybe of willow, of scrub to calve into a sheltered area, and you'll see them grazing the willow, which I looked at for a few times before I checked it out, and I'm told there's a willow has pain-killing properties. And animals will self-medicate given the opportunity. The same with our diversity in our hedges, and farmers thinking, oh, we'll take away that hedge and we'll have another few square meters of grass. The reality for me is that diversity in that hedge, that animals graze to a certain amount, is providing a huge benefit to the animal, and prevents all this necessity for supplementing with minerals and all. Everything is there in nature if we just let the animals have it.
And like, aside from the like medicinal stuff and whatever, do you find the cattle target certain species, like any of the kind of more Molinia grass and all that? Or
well, the Galloways would be renowned for that. Like when we put them out on the commonage, you would say, right, these animals will just go anywhere. But the reality is, when we observed them, they actually by nature actually practice rotational grazing. Now, the commonage I put them out onto, as you said at the start, my share of it is 17 hectares. But the reality is there's thousands of hectares available to them, because it's one commonage after another, after another, after another. And what I found, my farm graduates up the side of a hillside, and the commonage is at the top of that hillside. And what I found was the Galloways rotated around that area. They didn't actually go out over across the top of the hill. They rotated around the side of it, and you would find in about a month they were back to where they started. But in the meantime, they went round in a circle. And
they like to keep you in their view.
Yeah, and as I say, in that sort of summer, autumn time, they would have grazed quite a bit of Molinia, and you would notice the hill and some of my privately owned hill. It's got much greener if you're looking at it at this time of year. It's got much greener because there's no, or little or no, Molinia grass that hasn't been grazed, so it's not turning white at this time of year.
And what's the management system for your sheep?
Well, we have a small number of sheep that basically tidy up after the cattle. They some of the time they just rotate around after cattle. Generally, they're on the high nature value sort of natural grassland after the Galloways, and sometimes along with them. And I found like they have performed better because there's a better sward and a fresher regrowth of grass for them to eat. Whereas when maybe it was slightly undergrazed before, it's a vicious circle. Because it's undergrazed, they don't like it and they try to come down off it. And the reality is the cattle grazing it and keeping the sward shorter and fresher has encouraged the sheep back up around it as well, and means that they don't need any supplementary feeding. We just keep 70 ewes, and I just scanned there, and very roughly half and half with singles and doubles, and none of them are being fed or won't be for the next at least 2 or 3 weeks, because they still have enough to eat where they are.
And do they lamb outside as well, or do you bring them in? Yeah, so they're
at
12 months.
Generally, what I would do is sort of on their due date, I would take them somewhere close to the house and farmyard where we can keep an eye. And if we get some kind of a blizzard or something, we maybe would run them into a shed for nighttime or something. But ideally, we try not to. And we see as our hedges mature, our options are getting better there as well.
And so are there kind of what are the kind of the main challenges that face you as an upland farmer? Is it the invasives? Is it the fires? Is it what are the main challenges do you find as upland farmers?
Well, I suppose if you look back to when we would have had sheep on the commonage, there just seems to have been much more management and work involved than having cattle on the commonage. Now, the reality for me and all my neighbours is we're all now part-time farmers on a farm that traditionally would have reared a family, and it's getting to grips with that. Um, I don't see this farm ever becoming a full-time farm again, unless there was a dedicated time spent to doing a lot of direct selling. But I don't see that in the short term anyway. So I suppose the challenge is always to try and get performance from animals and have a saleable product. And I have found trying to match the animal with the landscape has improved that struggle, if you like.
Mm.
And I can see options to improve it more with diverse swards and more clover and just better management. I do think we're a bit deficient in research in this whole area for this type of farming. Like the advice we've been given here for the last 30 years is, oh, you need to intensify, you need to spread more fertilizer, you need to buy more feed, and you need to slaughter animals younger. I think we're challenging that, and I think rightly so.
Because you're part of the EIP, like I mentioned, so you might just explain to people what the Inishowen EIP is and what it's trying to achieve and what it has achieved.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned the kitchen table earlier, back sort of around the time of the last CAP reform, a group of half a dozen of us started to meet up quite regularly just to discuss very informally what we felt was coming down the tracks as regards CAP and as regards schemes for farmers. And this went on and it sort of coincided with the introduction of the glass scheme. And we discussed that and had huge reservations about collective agreements and about our payments being dependent on what our neighbour done. So we sort of quite ambitiously said that if we were left to it, we could design something better for farmers. So that coincided with us talking to Sligo IT and Sharon Sullivan, who's now with the Hen Harrier, I believe, told us there was an opportunity to apply to the Department of Agriculture for innovation partnership projects where groups could come together and come up with innovative ideas and put them to the Department of Agriculture. And there was an opportunity that the Department of Agriculture would fund some of these ideas and see how they would work out. So with that in mind, we put on an application. Now, to cut a long story short, our first application wasn't successful, but we were told that we had some quite good ideas to go again. So the next time it opened, we come back and focused ourselves and we put on a second application. And then we were funded to put on a project plan. Again, to try and synopsize what we were doing, we basically come up with 5 measures for farmers in Inishowen that we felt would deliver for environment, for biodiversity, for water quality, and generally for our paymasters in the EU. But more importantly for us, we felt that these measures could actually deliver for us financially on the farm. So we felt that these measures were a 1-1 for farmers. We were ticking the boxes for all our paymasters, and we were also improving the viability of our farms. So very briefly, our 5 measures that we come up with are, the first one is the reintroduction of cattle back onto the uplands, which is what we've been talking about. Again, very simply, we felt this was a resource that we had that was underused. The elephant in the room about areas of uplands is that they're actually undergrazed, and maybe our payments would be at risk because of land eligibility. So we felt there has to be scope to put cattle back onto the uplands, and that it's a low-cost system with 0 costs effectively during the grazing season. So that's one of our measures. The second measure we looked at was the whole area of diverse swards, or herbal leys is the other term for them, where we felt, again, the advice we had been given was to reseed, sow perennial ryegrass, put lots of fertilizer on it, and keep putting lots of fertilizer on it. What we found was happening in practice, we were reseeding, we'd taken the advice, establishing fabulous crops of perennial ryegrass, but our low input extensive systems, we weren't feeding the grass. We were spreading small quantities of 18-6-12 and maybe some nitrogen for one cut of silage. And what we found when we were doing this with perennial ryegrass, it didn't persist. We ended up with an open sward that ended up full of rushes and weeds, and actually back worse than when we started. So we looked at diverse swards and we felt this was much more compatible with a low input system. It doesn't need huge inputs of fertilizer. It just needs the pH and soil fertility to be right. And that we also realized that it has fabulous properties for animal performance. It has anthelmintic properties, and the list goes on. So that's our second measure. The third measure we incorporated was trees and agroforestry on the farm. Now, the first thing somebody's going to say to me is there already is an agroforestry scheme from the Department of Agriculture. That is the case. We looked at it at that time, and it had been in place for a number of years. There was 0 applicants in Donegal, so we felt, right, there must be something wrong with this. When we looked at it in more detail, we come to a very, very simple conclusion what was wrong with the current agroforestry scheme. And that was the objective of the Department of Agriculture in their agroforestry scheme was to end up with a forest on the farm. We felt our objective was different. What we wanted to do was to end up with loads of trees on a functioning livestock farm to complement the activity on the livestock farm and not to replace it. So we designed our agroforestry measure around that. The fourth measure we looked at, we basically lifted it from the organic farming system, and that's the use of red clover. We felt that this system needed to be looked at, that we felt there was potential there to use the clovers to fix nitrogen, to replace artificial nitrogen, and to grow very, very productive areas in red clover solely for fodder production for feeding our animals over the winter, with a high protein, high quality silage that would reduce the need for the concentrate feed coming in the farm gate. So that's our fourth measure. And our last measure was that we said that every participant was to have at least one pond on the farm. Now, the obvious benefits of ponds, I don't have to explain to anybody, for biodiversity and small invertebrates and even ground nesting birds. We felt that that's definitely a benefit, but we also felt there was scope there for a farming system to even look at using some of this as a water supply for the farm, although we're not currently paying for our water in a lot of cases, but that screw I think is going to tighten. And we even have seen some micro hydro generation built into waterways on the farm. So we really wanted to start the whole conversation about waterways and water flows on the farm. It's a hugely important area. And around that time in 2017, we had huge floods here in Inishowen. And we felt we really needed to look at waterways rather than what we have been told up to now is, oh, you're a farmer, don't dare touch that waterway on your farm, fence it off and don't ever look near it. We felt there's much more to water management on the farm than that, and we need to start that conversation. And the whole area of flood mitigation has become very apparent too, what farmers can do, especially in the uplands, to mitigate floods in the lowlands. and it's actually very, very good value for local authorities to encourage farmers to invest in some of this type of work. So that's a very brief synopsis of what we're up to up here. I hope I didn't go on too long there, Bridget.
No, I mean, there's obviously many elements to that and loads of questions around that, you know, I mean, it'd be fascinating to know and see kind of how much the biodiversity has improved amongst all the 25 farms. But also the other thing, I suppose, the importance of being part of a community, you know, I'd say that's been massive for all the farmers, you know, in terms of encouraging each other to do these measures. And, you know, I presume there's like a massive advantage in terms of that.
Yeah, well, we have tried to develop the relationship between our farmer participants as much as possible. We have regular workshops. We've had trips away, and you know, you do see the group responding to each other. And the great thing we have seen is some of their neighbours are actually engaging in some of our measures without the support of being on the EIP. And that's very encouraging, because that was kind of our aspiration, I suppose, that some of these measures make so much sense for farmers that maybe they would carry out some of them even they weren't funded to do it. So no, that's developing, and I think maybe Inishowen was ideal for it, because the way we're sort of cut off on a peninsula here, that there is a sense of community, and that we do tend to stick together anyway.
Okay, so it's most of the farmers that are on the peninsula are a part of it, is it? Or
yeah, they're all our participants are in Inishowen.
okay, got it. Okay. So I mean, for kind of upland farmers who aren't part of the Inishowen community, and but across the kind of Western Seaboard, where would you go to get advice on how to kind of best manage your land for biodiversity?
Well, maybe the smart answer to that would be look at what your grandfather did, because the reality for me, introducing black Galloway cattle onto my commonage after probably an absence of maybe 60 years, the reality was I'm doing what my grandfather done on that exact piece of land at that time. And you know, sometimes we have to look what was common sense then. It's probably still common sense. And you know, that we're very much given the one model of farming, the whole intensive thing, and it's not working particularly well for anybody, maybe other than some farmers in the dairy sector. And I feel, without going too political, that they're on a wheel of intensity that they can't get off. And when that wheel comes off the tracks, God knows what happens. You know, I think the word I haven't mentioned here is the whole idea of a resilient way of farming. That it's a resilient animal. It's also a resilient farmer that isn't so dependent on outside inputs. Like there's a lot of talk about feed and fertilizer prices increasing. Now, I suppose for this system of farming, it's not such a big deal.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you say about how low your inputs are and how, I suppose, how adapted the Galloways are to the landscape. So they're kind of just doing what they need to do out there and stuff. But I suppose the other thing that I was just interested in is, you know, in the few years that you've been part of the EIP, is there one moment or one species that you've seen like come back to your farm that hadn't been there before, or hadn't been there in a while?
Yeah, well, the one that jumps out at me is hares. We have a few on the farm again, and they were absent for a long time, and they seem quite at home again. That would be the one that really would jump out at me. And like on our own farm here, I laugh. We were talking before we joined the group about farmers removing hedges and this type of thing. Well, I have to confess, what I have removed and I'm going to continue to remove, is Sitka spruce from the farm. Now, it might have been one of the mistakes my grandfather probably made. I think he actually got the trees for nothing. He got them free. But I'm gradually having a program of trying to. I have quite a few fields here, and around the boundaries we have Sitka spruce, and I'm actually trying gradually to remove them and replace them with a nice mixture of a hawthorn hedge and various other things thrown in, and hopefully a few native trees. But you know, I'm hoping that that'll further add to the diversity on the farm, because they are sort of a monoculture around my boundaries, if you know what I mean. But,
talking monoculture, is there any invasive species that you have challenges with, or?
Not really. I suppose what I would translate there is I think farmers have been conditioned about monocultures and about anything that's not perennial ryegrass is such a weed, and it's really bad to have it, and you really need to get rid of it. Like, we have some rushes, we have some docks, we have nettles. They don't really change that much from year to year, and there are periods the animals eat them, and I don't see them as this eternal battle, that they're always going to be an element of them. And I do think that diversity, animals eat them and get some benefit out of them. And this thing about really trying to control everything to the last, like we would have quite a few areas with fairly heavy rushes that we control by cutting and mulching. Now we might even mulch them 3 times, maybe even 4 times a year. But the reality I found is that if you mulch them if you happen to get a chance sort of late August, the Galloways will actually eat the fresh rush in October, November. So it's about working with it, and like trying to open up cover, you know, for other life, for birds. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff there that you see coming back, frog spawn and everything, and you just know, well, at least I'm not going to poison them, which I may have been guilty of 20 years ago, trying to control rushes with MCPA and God knows what else. That didn't work anyway, by the way.
Have you been measuring your kind of your water qualities and your biodiversity species levels and your soil fertility?
In our project we have done ecological surveys on the uplands where the cattle are. On my own farm, which isn't part of the project, we actually haven't. Now, we've engaged very closely with Inishowen Rivers Trust. We actually have a small EIP with them on doing work in riparian zones on a specific river in Inishowen. So we've had the Rivers Trust out on our participant farms, giving the farmers demonstrations on measuring invertebrate counts and this type of thing in the water, and looking at the water quality. You know, because again, I think farmers are very interested in this, but they've been sort of told up to now, oh, don't you dare touch that and don't even look at it. Where the reality is that farmers were engaged with and maybe knew the potential damage they were doing, and started to develop knowledge on things like critical source areas along waterways. I mean, that's common sense, but they do need to be explained to farmers. So we're engaging as much as possible with that. As I say, with the Rivers Trust has been a great help, and we have helped them, and that they find it difficult to get farmers to engage with them because of the way historically it has been managed.
Okay, fair enough. And fires, is that a problem that you guys come across or not in your plants as much in your combination?
Inishowen would definitely not be the worst area for wildfires, because the uplands are grazed. You know, I do know there's other areas where, you know, the sheep numbers have really decreased, and there's lots of millennia and dead grass, and they're having huge issues. Our uplands wouldn't be in the worst condition in the first place, because there still is a good tradition of upland sheep on uplands and commonages. So we're lucky in that way. Now there is occasional wildfires, and like we have looked at the whole area of controlled burning, and we kind of come into the conclusion that controlled grazing with cattle would be much better for everybody. And that's kind of the direction we're trying to get people to head there, because at the end of the day, these uplands are a grazing platform as well. And the reality for me, if I put cattle on the uplands in May or June or July and don't take them off to November or December, I have absolutely no costs for those animals, and that has to be a factor taken into account as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really important one. If anyone has any questions, please do put them into the chat box. So Henry, just what do you think is the future of hill farming? Where do you think it should be going? What's your own vision?
There's something in my mind that maybe looking at my farm 20 years ago, you sort of had this thing in your head, it's poor quality land. And I think this is something, again, that has been put into farmers' mind. Like, I have changed my mind on that. It's not poor quality land, it's high nature value land. And it's probably much more valuable to society than the green field beside my house.
Even the name marginal land, it kind of just kind of means something else. You know,
it gives a very negative connotation.
Yeah, it does,
I think if farmers maybe could take pride back into the fact that they have this land, and well, the other thing is that they can get some kind of a fair return for their efforts. Now, again, without getting political, I see that the reform of the cap and in the next round is more favourable to farmers that are on the uplands with lower stocking rates, and historically always had lower stocking rates, and hopefully more recognition for the public good that we provide to everybody in managing and maintaining this land. And I do see that is the way things are changing. And I just hope we have enough young farmers to hang on to actually reap some of the benefits of that.
Yeah, because I think it's an important message. Like, as you were saying earlier, a lot of the farmers, including all the ones that you work with, are part-time farmers. And so in order for it to look after itself, it has to be a very kind of easy to manage kind of farming system. And it sounds like, you know, going back to the traditional breeds, which work best for the hill as well, it's kind of the way forward. But I mean, with lower inputs and stuff, but I suppose it's harder to, you know, industry has allowed a voice around, you know, what you should be doing.
What we have been, the mistake, if you like, I feel I've been making on this farm for 20 years was trying to farm it in a way that really productive mineral soils are farmed. That doesn't work. It's not what we have. And going down the intensive route and trying to improve in inverted commas, this type of land has turned out to be very poor advice. Like, I remember my father here, you know, there were schemes for drainage and everything else, and there was land drained here, but the reality is the soil structure wasn't there. It was heavy, peaty land, and the reality is you would need to do the same thing every 10 years. Whereas what I've tried to do is move back from that and open up the land again, put more open drains on it, and you think you're not losing anything. And with climate change and increased rainfall, we're going to have to even do more of that. And like trying to turn peatland into mineral soil isn't in anybody's interest
yeah.
in this day and age.
Yeah.
And it's accepting that and adjusting your farming system to suit that.
Yeah. Like you say, there was I've heard quite a few people say before, farm like your grandfather. It's funny how it's never farm like your father. There seems to be a whole generation and stuck there in the middle that got slightly led astray, and hopefully the farm like your grandfather comes back again. There's a question here from Gerald Walsh. Hi, Henry and Bridget. Some say some more on the transition to organic nutrient cycling on silage ground when cattle are out more, and how you found the integration of the red clover.
Yeah, sorry, there's quite a bit there.
Yeah, so we'll start with maybe say some more on your transition to organic.
Well, my transition to organic, what would I say about it? We were headed that direction, and that we were trying to reduce our inputs, and I suppose our big problem was our continental sucklers. They weren't really fitting in. Now, I suppose if I was being honest and maybe being very ruthless on the farm, I haven't done it yet, but maybe I should. Maybe there shouldn't be any continental cattle on this farm, and maybe we could farm the Galloways totally with a bit of crossbreeding. But I just had the philosophy that these trailer loads of feed and fertilizer coming on the gate weren't making me any money anyway, and that I suppose being pessimistic that anything would be better, and just the whole idea of changing the farm. I suppose we were changing, heading towards the conversion to organic, and that I suppose we had cut back our numbers and cut back our feed usage. A combination, then we could see that the Galloways would work in an organic system. We use our farmyard manure and whatever runoff goes into the slurry tank. We try and use that very effectively for getting some silage produced on the farm, and that works quite well. But you're only going to produce so much, so that's where the beauty of the Galloways comes in. That they're outside longer, and they're definitely grazing longer at the back end of the year, and that it just works. And again, the same thing with crossbred sheep, probably fairly prolific and productive flock, but a lot of it was based on feed coming out of a bag, and a big workload was the other thing. So the horn sheep, we felt were much better because they can be used on some of our mineral soils when it's too wet for the cattle anyway, and they can run around the high nature value land with the numbers I have very comfortably. They get an odd visit to the commonage, but I just found it's too much work. You can put them up for a few weeks after you take the lambs from them, but putting them up more than that, maybe I should, but I just don't have the time. So a lot of my changes are because I work full time off the farm, and it doesn't really make sense to pay somebody to do it either. And I suppose I'm doing the farming because I love it and I enjoy it. And there's nothing I like better than if I'm sitting at my desk for a big part of a day to get up and head to the top of the farm. Sorry, the integration.
Have you dealt with the integration of red clover? Not really.
Yeah, well, we have been playing about a lot with this last couple of years, or even longer, where we have reseeded some land with diverse swards, and that's very straightforward. It works very well. It's probably quite expensive. What we have tried on some of our other land is stitching in clover and stitching in diverse swards. We're trying to get to the bottom of it. Sometimes it seems to work better than others, and sometimes the clovers, you don't actually see them until the next year. So we're learning as we go along. Now, I do feel that our department and Teagasc really need to put their heads together and do some more research on this very quickly, because there's huge potential, and not even for organic farmers, for all farmers. The amount of nitrogen that can be fixed by clover. I suppose our one input that we don't apologize for is lime. Unfortunately, we had a lime quarry very close to us, about 7 miles away, but it's closed. But now we have to take lime probably 60 miles away. But the reality is there's definitely an economic return for it. And if you're thinking on clovers and diverse swards, you really need to have your pH right. And it's an input that you just have to, we try and use it every year so that you're not faced with a huge bill in any one year.
Yeah, fair enough. James Gilmartin says, excellent work, Henry. To quote from Gabe Brown, when you change how you do things, you change a little. When you change how you see things, you change a lot. Can you see the continental cattle eventually leaving your system?
Yeah, I honestly think so. And maybe the more I talk to people in these forums, the more I'll decide. I think I have a good viable option, and that at the moment I've been breeding all my black Galloways with a black Galloway bull. Now I do have an option of putting a put-bred shorthorn to the black Galloway, which is going to give me a blue-grey cow. Now this, I feel, would be an animal that maybe I could keep some of, and it's definitely an animal I could sell on, because that is the genuine blue-grey cow. And I know that they're extremely sought after in Scotland, and I think if farmers here got a taste for them, a fairly small cow that's economical to keep, that can produce a very good continental calf. The other option I have is actually putting a Solaire bull to Galloways, which I'm told by a few people have been doing it. Gives an excellent calf. Now, I actually have the first one born on the farm here a couple of weeks ago, so I'm very interested to see how that does, because they're also very easy calving. And I'm not going down the road, no matter what I do, of having something that I need a vet or a jack to take a calf from. So that's my options. And even, to be honest, the Solaire bull I have with my Continentals, there's no calving them. They just calve themselves. And I've got used to that, and I don't think I'll ever be straying too far from it.
Easy calving, that's nice. Mary Toppedy says, brilliant work, Henry. Would you have any advice for a new EIP, the same size as yourselves, farming in the uplands and lowlands of Kerry? Thanks.
Well, I suppose my advice for anybody thinking on an EIP, the first thing is you can do it. I suppose when we put in our application, we didn't consult widely with education institutions or professors and anything. It came very much from what we felt would work ourselves, and I think that came across in our application, because we were told we were very highly scored. So I think if you have a group that has the ambition and the will to do something different, it doesn't have to be hugely complicated, and I actually think the simpler the idea, the more chance that it'll actually work. So it's really down to getting a group of committed individuals together and really trashing out something that they feel would improve their livelihoods, and getting that down on paper.
I think what you mentioned that you guys have 5 measures, and that's kind of a good, not to go into 25 measures. Do you know what I mean? Like, just to have kind of 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, kind of, this is what we're going to achieve. Do you know what I mean? And how we're going to achieve it. And
I think our EIP is a bit unique, in that a lot of the other EIPs are their sole focus is on environment and biodiversity and water quality. And I think we were a bit different in that the species we want to protect first and foremost is the farmer. You know, and that was our thing, that we weren't going to do anything unless it made sense for the farmer. And it wasn't that difficult then to go the next step, that it made sense for everybody else as well. But we were very adamant that this has to be something that's practical, that a farmer, right, that sort of makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Dara McKiernan says, good stuff, Henry. Are you finishing cattle off grass? If so, how do the Galloways fit into the factory spec schemes? Are there allowances for overage cattle and off-spec cattle?
Yeah, well, maybe the last thing first. Obviously, in the organic, you have up to 36 months. You know, an animal is classed as still in spec when it's up to 36 months. The other thing is, as far as carcasses goes, you have to get over 250 kilos, which for a black Galloway is easily enough done. Now, my ideal aspiration would be that we would finish cattle off grass. My second best option would be that we would finish them off either diverse sward silage or ideally red clover silage. Now, I haven't used as much red clover silage as I would like, because I just haven't time to get organized and actually get it established. But that would be my ideal for winter, that ideally you would finish some in the autumn and you could finish more then over the winter on red clover silage. Now, I suppose in an ideal world for me here, I could see options if there was more farmers around me in the organic system, especially farmers with better quality land, that I would love to do some kind of a partnership or cooperation with them, that they would take over and maybe finish my animals on their better quality land. I would like the concept that I wouldn't even sell them the animals, that we would profit share whenever the animal would be killed. I think there's potential in that, and then nobody's taking the risk, and everybody gets some of the benefit. And as I say, that's why I'm hoping more farmers join the organic scheme. The other thing I would love to see locally here, like while we're in Inishowen and there's a lot of uplands and there's a lot of high nature value land, like we're not far away from some of the most productive mineral soils in Ireland. And I would love to see some of the tillage farmers getting involved in organics, because I would be knocking on their door to buy organic oats or organic barley or wheat, so that I could supplement my animals with an organic, locally sourced feed. I think that would make sense in whatever shape or form we would do that. But the reality for me now, if I look for organic oats, they're probably going to have to come from Wexford or somewhere, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the cost. James Gilmartin says, really interested to hear about agroforestry. It has so many benefits in an upland setting for all seasons. What type of tree planted how far apart and how difficult to establish?
We have sort of looked at this differently than anybody else, I think. We see loads of opportunities on a farm for trees, whether it be for shelter, whether it be for disease control, whether it be for controlling the flow of water, whether it be for capturing nutrients running off the land. There's all kinds of scenarios. So our project reflects that. We have planted trees in lower areas of the farm. We have taken small fields and closed them off and fenced them. We have fenced along waterways. We have fenced in high up exposed areas. I suppose the one thing we have in common with everything we've planted is our aspiration in the long term is that maybe they're fenced off now for animals, but in the long term, animals will get the benefit of them and be back and around them again. That's key to us. And we have planted areas, say, if just for instance, you take a small field and plant it, that's fenced off totally. No animals get access to it for probably 5 years, depending on how well the trees grow. But from there on, our objective is to let animals use them, especially in the shoulders of the year, in the springtime and in the autumn. And we have the whole concept of creating areas on the farm where animals can graze when weather conditions aren't ideal everywhere else. There's a whole concept of a green barn, which basically is an outdoor area, which has all the benefits and a plus more of an animal being inside. And
is it a canopy, like, just natural?
Yeah, and all
canopy.
When people ask us what do we plant, well, probably, to put it very simply, if we look around and see something growing in the area, and doing pretty well, we'll plant something like that there. You know, we have planted all kinds from oak back to even an odd Sitka spruce. But the reality is the right tree in the right place. Mm. Now, the one thing I would say to you about our agroforestry, our project's going to be over before a farmer really perceives any benefit from the tree planting as regards livestock on the farm is concerned. But we know that, and we knew that before we started. And I'm delighted I see here, I think I see Jim McAdam has joined us. Like we have visited, I've been in Loughgall a few times and met Jim at this stage, where there's agroforestry there developed 30 years ago, and it's such an inspiration for our farmers. We took a group of them up there to actually see it, to see grass growing around trees that were planted 30 years ago, and to see how much the grazing season on that farm has been extended because of the agroforestry. And like that's our long-term aspiration. Some of it maybe will be for our children, but I'm sure there's a lot younger viewers than me here that will see a benefit in their own time, and biodiversity and water quality and everything else will see a benefit much sooner.
Well, it's nice to see that project now, like you say, 30 years later. It kind of gives inspiration as to what can be achieved, you know.
Yeah, and like the whole thing is back to resilience of the farm. And you're not losing any ground by planting it in trees. You're lengthening your grazing season. You're drying out land. All positive things that are positive for your livestock. And people really need to get away from this idea, oh, well, I'm losing land if I plant trees on it. In our system, you're not. You're gaining in the long term very productive land. Now, I would make one comment that we had serious difficulties with the Department of Agriculture before we engaged in this, and that the one thing all our farmer participants and myself were very insistent on is if we plant trees and land, we cannot lose our basic payment on it. We can't lose our ANC payment on it. This land is probably the most eligible land for payments on the farm, as far as I would be concerned. And we had quite a debate with the department before they finally agreed to a mechanism where if our farmer plants an area of trees, it's not excluded or redlined from his farm, and he gets all his normal payments on it. And I feel this is a huge blockade at the moment to farmers planting trees, that this perception, well, I'm losing area, I'm going to lose payments, and that really needs to be changed. Now, I do see some light at the end of the tunnel where agroforestry is now treated as an agricultural activity in the next CAP. So hopefully that'll sort it out.
Yeah, brilliant. Listen, we're coming to the end of our time, Henry, and thanks for you've been really generous in sharing your own journey about your farm, but also the journey you've had with your farm has been really interesting, how you've kind of changed and pivoted, and you know where you've arrived. And what do you what's your own vision for your farm? Like, how hopeful are you for your own farm?
Well, I have to say that I have turned, I suppose, a corner on my own farm that I really enjoy farming it. And I think there was a period that I didn't, because it was the system just didn't work. And I think that's a big thing, especially for a part-time farmer, because if you don't enjoy it and don't get some pleasure out of it, you're not going to continue doing it. And I think my family coming after me, if they felt, well, Henry's just doing this because he has to, well, I'm not going to do that. Whereas maybe there's some hope that, well, he really enjoys this. It must be okay, and I'll get involved in it. So as far I have plans to do things like plant trees and all on the farm that I will eventually get around to doing. And I suppose I'm quite happy with the direction the farm has taken. I suppose the big aspiration I have would be to do something with the produce coming off the farm, because I think it's fabulous. And I think this is what any discerning consumer should be eating. And it's just how to do that is not just 100% clear yet, but maybe there's an EIP in that alone.
There's definitely obviously a lot of added value to your product with what you're doing, like just even hearing your story. So congratulations, well done. And it's thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really inspirational. If anyone missed any part of this or wants to share it with anyone, it will be on YouTube soon. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, these will also be are also on our YouTube's channel. If you have any questions for our farmers, you can go on our forum on our website, where we also have lots of resources around many practices around farming for nature. Our next Q&A is in 2 Tuesdays' time with Ambassador Rod Calderputz, and that's on orchards and building up a business around orchards. But meanwhile, thank you, Henry. And if anyone hasn't seen Henry's video, it's we have a short 5-minute clip on Henry's farm up on our YouTube. So do check it out. It's really nice to see his actual practices in action. Henry, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, thanks for joining us as well. And hopefully we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. And
thanks, Bridget.
No worries. Take care. Thanks for your time.
Bye, folks.